Warning, this podcast contains graphic descriptions of violent events and offensive language. It may be disturbing for some listeners.
In one day, I'll watch a man die. My name is Jeremy Campbell, and I am a journalist. I was asked to serve as the media witness for the execution of Marion Wilson. He's a man convicted of a 1996 murder. When that email came in from the state of Georgia asking me to witness a man die, there was really only one way I could justify saying yes. And that is if our team learns everything we can about the man being put to death, his crime, the victim, and if we face the controversy surrounding the death penalty in America head on. I'm part of a team called Atticus, and we're named after the one you're probably thinking of, and a quote by Atticus Finch himself in To Kill a Mockingbird. Best way to clear the air is to get it all out in the open. It's our team's mantra, and in the time left before the execution, we're working hard to clear the air about everything surrounding this case. Here's what we know. Marion Wilson met 25-year-old Donovan Parks at a Wal-Mart in Milledgeville, Georgia. Parks was off work from his job as a prison guard, and he was on his way home from church. That's when he stopped by the store for cat food. Donovan Parks agreed to give Wilson and another man, Robert Butts, a ride. 16 minutes later, and his own father, who was also a prison guard, found him dead in the street, shot once in the back of the head, execution style. As his family waits for justice, which may come this week, our producer, Maddie Ray, made contact with Freddie Parks on the phone. He's Donovan's father.
I had the opportunity of speaking to Freddie Parks. They haven't been able to rest for 23 years, knowing that the murderers of their son are still alive in jail. They don't have justice. When I spoke to him, I was really surprised that he picked up reopening the worst day of his life when he found his son. He just wanted to rest. He said he's ready for this next chapter of his life, for this to all be over. And we got to speak for a little bit. He wasn't really interested in speaking too much to me. Thursday would be a big day for him.
Execution day.
Right. He just told me that he's ready to rest. He's ready to move on with this next chapter of his life, get justice. And I'm worried. I really want to hear about Donovan, the victim. And he just told me, he said, no one's going to forget about my son.
Oh.
And then he hung up.
Wow.
That's a powerful statement.
Cried.
Oh.
Yeah. I was really upset by that, mainly because I feel like his window of opportunity for sharing his son's story was closing. And I can't imagine what his family's going through.
Mm-hmm.
Freddie Parks told our producer, Maddie, that he'll be at the parole board hearing today. That's the group that will determine whether tomorrow's execution will move ahead as scheduled, or if it could be put on pause while the board reconsiders Wilson's fate. I worry that if I go to the hearing, it could jeopardize my role as media witness. A colleague of mine once had her slot as media witness canceled at the last minute after she interviewed the man scheduled for execution. So my team went to gather the details without me.
The board has reviewed its file on Mr. Wilson. It's also reviewed all the massive amounts of materials which were given to them. It's also looked over the application as well as exhibits which actually was given as well to the board. And at the conclusion of today's appointment, members will deliberate among themselves, and then together I will call for a vote and a decision will be rendered. At this time, the board is prepared and ready to receive your oral arguments.
That is all they got to hear. From that point forward, what goes on during the parole board stays within the parole board. It's closed door, no media allowed. Our producer, Kira Frisbee, has a saying, do your fucking job. It's her mood, it's her vibe, it's her brand. She's an unstoppable investigator. So when she hears closed door meeting, she gets to the bottom of why.
It's not necessarily that media isn't allowed into these board hearings. The board has full discretion as to whether or not they want media in. And they made a vote right then and there that they were going to close the meeting, close the doors due to privacy concerns, due to gruesome details that were going to be discussed.
There was another reason why they went to this meeting. That's to get closer to the victim's family, hoping for more information about how they're dealing with the upcoming execution. Other than our producer Maddie's phone call to Donovan's dad, we haven't had any interaction with his family. That didn't change at the board meeting.
I know that he had said that he was frustrated. It took so long for the death sentences to be carried out. 23 years. It's a long time. It's a long time for Robert sitting in prison. It's a long time for Marion to be sitting in prison. It's a long time for Donovan Parks' family, just waiting. Think about 20 years and what can happen in 20 years of your life. And all of that time seems to be, for all three, waiting until execution day.
Behind closed doors, the parole board combed over it all. It listened to those arguing Marion Wilson Jr. should be spared execution, and it listened to those demanding the court's order be carried out in the name of justice. But there's something major that the board didn't do today. It didn't do the one thing everyone was waiting to happen. On the day before the scheduled execution, the board didn't make up their mind. After hours of listening, the board decided to take the evening to sleep on it. Their ruling on the request to put the execution on hold will not be announced today after all. Unless things change fast in the courts, the Parks family will watch a second man convicted of killing their son be executed tomorrow. I'll be in the room too when Marion Wilson Jr. becomes the 1,500th person executed in the United States since our country reinstated the death penalty in 1976. He'll die in Jackson, Georgia, where lethal injection is the sole method of execution. That wasn't always the case. The state used to kill in the electric chair. Old Sparky is what they called it. About 8 years ago, the Georgia Supreme Court shut it down, declaring Old Sparky cruel and unusual punishment. Some states have used other methods, like death by firing squad in Utah back in 2010. However, now, nationwide, lethal injection is the primary method of execution in all states with the death penalty. Wilson's execution will happen in Georgia. I researched what to expect based on the policies in place here. First, the condemned has the option to take a sedative. In Georgia, the drug Ativan is offered for anxiety. The actual drug used to kill varies state to state, but in Georgia, they use pentobarbital. It takes about 7 minutes from injection to death, but it can take up to 2 hours. When a toxic level dose is injected, all electrical impulses in the brain shut down, and the cardiovascular system fails. Death by cardiac arrest. This drug is considered more humane by some because it doesn't paralyze the inmate. He or she simply appears to fall asleep. Even so, organizations like the American Medical Association discourage physicians from taking part. The AMA's ethics code, adopted in 1980, states, quote, "A physician, as a member of a profession dedicated to preserving life when there is hope of doing so, should not be a participant in a legally authorized execution."
If we're a free country, then people in states who want the death penalty, they have the right to have it.
That's Michael Rushford. He's part of a nonprofit called the Criminal Justice Legal Foundation. The group basically makes sure death penalty convictions are upheld.
We've probably done over 200 death penalty cases in the Supreme Court since we've started in 1982. The law is structured so that the default is on the murderer's side. If there's any smell of hint of an error, then he gets more hearings and he gets more reviews, and his sentence is postponed or even overturned. So it's real tough to execute an innocent person in this country. I think it's something about the American culture, and in this country, we've placed the very highest value on a person's life, an innocent person's life. Life is ahead of everything else in the Declaration of Independence. And the reason is because we ask people to be responsible for themselves. But it seems to me that the value of the innocent life in this country is based on the price someone pays for taking it. And in this country, people don't value the life of the killer the same as they do about his innocent victim.
Michael argues that a death sentence is about more than punishment. It's also prevention.
Life without parole is not a safe sentence. Nobody's particularly safe from a murderer who's supposed to be spending his life in prison. Life without parole inmates in states that don't have the death penalty can kill with impunity in the prison. They can kill anybody they don't like. Because what are they going to get? Another life sentence? Oh my, so what? And there are powerful gangs that run prisons from the inside who put out hits on people they don't like.
From his vantage point, Michael believes the death penalty is something that most Americans want as a safeguard within the justice system.
Even here in crazy California, the public, every time it's had a chance to vote to keep the death penalty for the worst murders, they voted to do it because they just feel it's immoral for someone who kills a little child or rapes and kills a bunch of girls should be able to sit and watch TV in his cell and get free health care while those victims are in the ground. And people in other countries can value innocent life in whatever way they want. But people came here to start our country because we had a different set of values. And human life, innocent life, is the highest on the list.
But some states have changed their laws around the death penalty, making it more rare and more difficult for the courts. Bob Audeby lives in Colorado, where many death row sentences were overturned after the state revamped its policy, requiring a full jury to issue the death sentence. Before the change to the law, it was all in a judge's hands. Bob used to be for the death penalty. Not anymore. He spoke about this on An Imperfect Union. That's a partnership between our company, Tegna, and Facebook Watch. The show brings together people from different backgrounds with drastically different points of view and listens as they talk it all out while doing some good for their community. Here's Bob.
The death penalty breeds hate, breeds animosity. I've seen families destroyed because one parent didn't want the death penalty, the other parent did.
Bob's son was a prison corrections officer killed at age 23. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? This isn't the story of Donovan Parks and Marion Wilson, even though there is that father-son prison guard connection. This family lives in Pueblo, where Bob's son Eric was killed on the job by an inmate within the prison.
I would have strangled him myself. I realized after 11 years, my son came back and told me, "Get over it, Pa."
It was a judge that sentenced his son's killer to death in 2003, but that was overturned in 2007 when the Colorado Supreme Court ruled that only a jury could impose the death penalty. That means that one judge no longer has the power to issue the death penalty without the support of a full jury vote.
I was able to forgive him and my family, and now my life is even better. Even though my son is gone, he showed me a better way. He brought me back to the reality of forgiveness and the power of forgiveness. We have no right to take another man's life. The law is just words on paper. It don't mean that it's right. Look at slavery. Look at prohibition.
Jim Stotler sees it a much different way. His daughter, Mandy, and her 2 children were killed in 2004. Some of the words used in court to describe the gruesome murder were evil, incomprehensible, horrific. The crime was that bad. The man who killed them was sentenced, not to death, but to life without parole. This was after the judge accepted a guilty plea. Stotler says he wanted his daughter's killer to be put to death.
The other people that are that violent, I believe, should get the death penalty too. I've believed in capital punishment only when it's proven, and not if there's any doubt, and only if it's for the extremely violent.
Through An Imperfect Union, Bob and Jim did volunteer work together at a nonprofit while discussing their opposing views on the death penalty. This portion of their conversation was on the show, and it really stood out to me.
Hello there, young man.
How you doing, sir? Jim Stotler.
Bob Audeby, Chris
Nice to
Butler.
meet you, sir. Jim Stotler.
Jim Stotler. Have we ever met before?
I don't think so, baby.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
I guess you're heading us this way, she said.
So here's our unit that we have that needs some painting, which you gentlemen are so kind to do for us.
There we go.
Let me put that where we can't step in it.
Looks like they just got this done mixing this. How'd you get into, like the criminal type stuff?
Well, see, I was a correction officer.
Oh,
I helped open Ark Valley out in Ordway.
Oh, okay.
And then 10 or 15 years later, my son joined the Department of Corrections.
Yeah, that's him.
And my son, he was my best friend. We hunted, we fished, we played ball together, everything.
My son.
And he had barely turned 23 when he was murdered. In 2002 in Lyman.
I think I remember.
See, and for 10, 11 years, I didn't want to kill the guy. I would have done it myself. But I've been involved in 4 death penalty cases since my son's. And the more I see, the more I'm against it. So you've had violence in your life. You've had people that you love killed.
Yeah. So I lost my daughter and very young grandchildren. He didn't just kill them, he tortured them.
Man.
Like in my case, it's kids, you know?
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it's just not, it's not hate, it's you got something that's broke. It's just so horrible that if you let it exist, it's gonna continue.
Now there's 3 things that could happen if you don't sentence them to death. They live in the hell that they created. That wasn't our fault. Or like the guy that killed my son, he found his way back to God. Or you could be found not guilty.
You know, the biggest thing that I see is when you let them continue to live, it doesn't stop them from the violence.
And see, you could medicate them fools. If they're not going to behave on their own, and they're a risk to society, there are medications that will change their attitudes. Just throwing them in a clubhouse with a bunch of other violent individuals ain't going to help nothing.
It's just not worth losing more human life for some innocent person.
But more violence does not correct violence.
Well, one thing we can agree upon is the court systems, the laws are not what they should be.
A good man would not kill and would not take another person's life. That's my own opinion.
Okay. That's harsh.
Yeah. It's one nice thing about America. Everybody has the right to opinion. And I respect his, and hopefully he respects mine.
I respect you for just being here. This ain't an easy thing to do.
Talking about the death penalty is not always an easy thing to do. And I expect actually watching the process will be even harder. Since beginning this project, I've been asking other journalists if they've witnessed an execution, without asking that many friends and colleagues. I counted at least half a dozen journalists I've known who served as media witness, watching from the execution chamber. My only experience with an execution was covering one from the outside of prison as a daily news reporter when Jeff Hollinger witnessed the death of Kelly Gissendanner. And I'll never forget seeing Jeff emerge from the fog with all the lights from the TV news crew shining toward that prison. I wanted to know how that experience lingered, maybe even haunted him some 3 years later. I wanted to talk to you about what to expect and what I should be looking for, what I should be saying, what I should be talking about. On a personal note, one of the things that drove me to want to do it is I thought about the fact that almost every American has an opinion, one way or the other, on the death penalty, yet almost every American also doesn't want to face it. And as a journalist, part of me felt an obligation to look toward it, even though it's something as humans we all want to look away from.
You know, many people will come up to you and say, oh my goodness, you can't unsee what you are about to see. Well, I think that is a cliche. I sort of went in there just wanting to experience this, to understand it better, to have a better, clear view of the penal system, of death row, of victims, of perpetrators, of the American justice system. And I think it has given me a view of things that I'm really glad that I experienced this. I'm really glad that I went through it, though I would not do it again. I will not witness another execution. But I'm really glad that I did, in this sense, that it is something that I've thought about a lot over the last couple of years, and not, the sort of voyeuristic aspect of someone just dying, but I think of all of the moving parts around the death penalty have given me kind of a clearer view, and I think it has changed my view a little bit of the death penalty. I've never been a great proponent of it, though I'm not opposed to it. And I think those who are opponents of the death penalty have always said, well, look, you can't have it both ways. You can't say, well, someone who commits this crime should be executed while others should not. That there has to be, basically one size should essentially fit all when you're talking about the death penalty. But I think in some federal crimes, I'm not opposed to the death penalty, even after witnessing. Timothy McVeigh should be executed, and was, for the Merrill Building in Oklahoma City in the mid-1990s, or co-conspirators with Osama bin Laden. I don't have any problem with that at all. I do have a problem with people who are killing a husband or a wife in a moment of rage, robbing a liquor store. I struggle with those issues.
The actual day, what should I expect when I arrive?
I think you find yourself absorbed into the system, that they take your wallet, they take your keys, they take your freedom, and even when you want to...
They take your cell phone.
They take your cell phone, and when you want to go to the urinal, you're going to have to be escorted to it. I've never really been in jail before. I've never been immersed in it, and particularly a state prison. I was surprised at how frightening it was, just how cinder blockish it was, how the guards were frightening. They were big, and they didn't really want to be my friend either, even though I had not committed a crime and I was going to be let go as soon as this experience came to an end. But I was just struck by how everything is taken from you and you become absorbed as part of the system. And that system is, as like cinder blocks. I sort of felt like that. I felt like I was just, purposeless and nameless.
What's it like in the actual room? Is there glass? Are you there with family members of the...
You're talking about the execution.
During the actual execution.
It's interesting. We were escorted very quickly, a little bit after midnight. It was a very eerie evening as well, foggy. And you could not see more than 20 feet in front of you.
I remember that, the fog, and there was so much media attention for that particular case. And the way that it shimmered on the lights, it was almost otherworldly.
Yeah, it was something that I will never forget, ever forget. The images were so haunting and eerie, and it was as you would imagine it to be if you were writing some sort of novel about execution. It was really very, very eerie. So as we approach where this building is, it struck me as like a concession stand at a stadium. It's a very small facility. It feels, I think that's probably the best way to describe it. It just all of a sudden, you come up on this building, you get out, you go in, there were, I believe, 3 pews, maybe 4 pews. And as you walk in, the whole room is ringed by men in tactical armor and automatic weapons, and they are as big as NFL players. And you sit there, the condemned is strapped to a gurney, and it is a full glass wall of which she can see us as we walked in. And there was a certain choreography about all of it that was also very, very strange. The announcement to all of us that if anyone had a medical emergency during this instance, this procedure, you would not be able to leave, and no one would come in to take care of you. In other words, basically, if you faint and you collapse or you just come unwound at the thought of this, and apparently that has happened, or they would not be bringing it up, but no one will come in until the condemned has
That's not the priority.
But the other thing, Jeremy, I thought that I was really struck by it was, I don't want to say it was a show, but it certainly had a sort of theatrical part. I mean, you've got 2 doctors or 3 doctors in there wearing white coats and had a a stethoscope around their neck, and the curtain would close and open, and then the MC was pretty much the warden who would make the announcement about what you are about to see and sort of the rules of engagement. And, do you have anything to say? All of it had a sense of drama. I would guess from another era, from the Victorian era. I mean, I think all of this is probably passed down through the generations and maybe through the centuries as well. Certainly the last meal is part of that choreography as well. All of this sort of has a wink and a nod to generations past. And it's back to what you said at the beginning when we were talking about the great passion of people for and against the death penalty. There are really two elements in American life right now that evoke those kinds of emotions and those kinds of responses, and that would be the death penalty and abortion. There really is no middle ground. You either are for or against.
You said you wouldn't do it again. Why?
I did it for perspective. I did it for understanding. I did it for a life experience. I don't need to do it again because all of those have been checked.
Any parting words, advice?
I think you just have to go and I think you should take the next day off to process it. I went home, I think by the time I got home to Midtown Atlanta, it was about 4 a.m. and my family was asleep, and I just didn't feel like much going to bed. Not that I was necessarily, life had been lost, and I don't mean to sound callous, but I just found myself more unsettled by the issue of poverty in the United States.
The circumstances
the circumstances of which I was just talking about. The whole issue of poverty is a grinding circle of which generationally it is the root of so much in this country that is of tragedy, of sadness, of violence. And I think that's what I came away from, just thinking about those issues of how when you are born into poverty, how difficult it is to be able to get out of it. And we live by that sort of Paul Bunyan myth in this country that anyone can make it. Maybe, but maybe not.
By the time we finished this interview, the Department of Corrections released details of what Marion Wilson requested for his last meal: a medium pizza, 20 chicken wings, grape juice, and a tub of butter pecan ice cream. That last meal menu means we're getting close to execution day. Will it go as planned tomorrow? Or will an announcement from the parole board in the morning put everything on hold? Could Wilson be spared after all? Our next episode of number 1500 is streaming now.